A cherry red Tesla heading toward Mars with a dummy called Starman behind the wheel is without much debate the most bizarre sight in the history of space travel. But the man behind it is clearly no dummy.
Just wanted something to capture the imagination, get people excited about space.
Elon Musk, the founder of SpaceX, knows how to get attention. Successfully launching the Falcon Heavy rocket last year, landing 2 boosters back at Cape Canaveral, and flying Starman all on that first test flight got SpaceX plenty of it. For Musk, Falcon Heavy was a stepping stone toward fulfilling his long-held vision of a self-sustaining city on Mars.
I think we should really do our very best to become a multi-planet species and to extend consciousness beyond Earth, and we should do it now.
Musk founded SpaceX in 2002, and reality quickly hit him squarely in the face. Flying in space was not easy, and it was unforgiving. The first demonstration flights of the Falcon 1 rocket from Kwajalein Atoll in the Pacific failed. SpaceX was in trouble, pretty much before it got off the ground.
It was our 4th launch, and if that launch had not succeeded, SpaceX, that would have been the end of SpaceX. That was all. I'd run out of money. There were no more investors, and that would have been it.
But it wasn't. It was just the beginning. The successful flight in 2008 was the first privately developed liquid-fueled rocket to orbit the Earth. That same year, NASA awarded SpaceX a $1.6 billion contract to fly resupply missions to the International Space Station using his next-generation Falcon 9 rocket and the Dragon spacecraft.
So you can see behind me various barrel sections for Falcon 9. That's actually serial number 2. That completed tank is serial number 2 of Falcon 9. Serial number 1's on the test stand in Texas. And then serial number 3 is in barrel sections on the floor.
During the past 6 years, the company's Falcon 9 has lifted satellites into orbit. Dragon has delivered supplies to the space station. And in a revolutionary technological advancement, landing and reusing the first stage boosters.
So obviously, if we can reuse the rocket, say 1,000 times, then that would make the capital cost of the rocket per launch only about $50,000.
And with another contract from NASA in hand, the company was building Crew Dragon to carry astronauts to the space station. Success has not come without some significant setbacks. A Falcon 9 exploded after liftoff, another blew up on the launch pad, and a Crew Dragon was destroyed during a pad test. The company is now nearly 3 years behind schedule getting astronauts to the space station. Space is hard, which seems to push Musk harder. Ever the promoter, Musk, the P.T. Barnum of the 21st century, continues to keep his company squarely in the spotlight.
I'd like to introduce the first paying customer of VFR. Would Yusaku Miyazawa please come forward?
Miyazawa, a Japanese billionaire, will fly with a group of his friends to the moon on a massive rocket called Starship. How much he paid for the flight, which is years away because Starship hasn't flown yet, is not known. SpaceX, in a relatively short amount of time, has become a household name. So much so that one could argue it is the most recognizable private company brand in aerospace. And clearly, Elon Musk intends to keep it that way. For MyRadar, I'm John Zarrella.
From epic hurricanes to record-breaking tropical storms, the last few years have left indelible marks across this country. Hurricane season is upon us, and the time to prepare for what nature could bring is here. I'm Chief Meteorologist Leslie Hudson. Join me along with meteorologists Mike Linden and Stephanie Lauber as we maneuver through this year's storm season. Navigating the Storm, a MyRadar special series launching June 1st with live reporting and commentary from our team of meteorologists. Join us live in the app and online as we power through the potential wind and water impacts that could affect us all.
The SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket sits atop Launch Pad 39A, poised to lift the Crew Dragon spacecraft and its precious cargo, 2 men on their seminal journey to the International Space Station. This is it, counting down to a moment some 9 years in the making.
Liftoff.
It was 2011 when the last U.S. astronauts left the Earth on a U.S.-built spaceship, the Shuttle Atlantis. Now, NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley are about to taste history, flying in a commercially built vehicle no one has flown in before. They landed at the Kennedy Space Center last week for final preparations, including the obligatory landing strip press conference.
Both Doug and I are really excited to be here. This is an awesome time to be an astronaut with a new spacecraft, to get a chance to go and fly.
Think of it this way. In 1981, John Young and Bob Crippen flew the Shuttle Columbia on a test flight. That was 39 years ago. And that was the last time astronauts flew a freshly minted, newly designed spaceship from U.S. soil. Like Young and Crippen, Behnken and Hurley flew Space Shuttles too, albeit decades after Columbia's maiden voyage. Like Young and Crippen, Behnken and Hurley were military test pilots. And this is a test flight with all the risks that come with spaceflight.
Right now, we are trying to identify any risks that we know of that's out there and continue to look at risks and buy them down. But we also can't fool ourselves. You know, human spaceflight is really, really tough.
This past weekend, to make it as smooth as possible before they fly, the astronauts went through a launch day dry run. Dressed in their spacesuits, Hurley and Behnken exited the Neil Armstrong Operations and Checkout Building, posed for pictures, and got into the specially designed Tesla SUV for the 20-minute ride to the launch pad, walked across the access arm to the Crew Dragon spacecraft. All of this done with social distancing protocols in place. The astronauts say they have been tested a couple times for coronavirus, but added the extra medical attention is not a big deal.
And it seems like every year the scrutiny gets greater. So from that perspective, I think it's been relatively normal, comparatively speaking. And we just, I think, after all these years, are just kind of used to the poking and prodding and blood draws and all the other things that come along with flying into space.
One of the other things that goes along with flying in space is the weather. And with Crew Dragon's advanced abort capabilities, the weather has to be acceptable not only at the launch site, but up the East Coast and, believe it or not, across the Atlantic.
We're monitoring weather all the way along the ascent track, which means from here in Florida all the way up the eastern seaboard of North America, United States and Canada, and all the way over basically to Ireland across the northern Atlantic. We're monitoring that weather, and along that way we're monitoring a lot of the same things. We're looking at winds, we're looking at lightning, we're looking at precipitation, we're actually looking at waves. We're looking at wave velocity and wave height.
Once in orbit and on their way to the station, Hurley and Behnken will put the spacecraft through its paces to test out its capabilities. Then, about 19 hours after liftoff, they will rendezvous with station. And by then, we won't likely be calling it Crew Dragon.
Have you guys named your Crew Dragon?
We have. We have to save some suspense for the mission itself, but we do have a name, and we will break it out appropriately, and we've got something for you to look forward to on launch day.
So, Crew Dragon will get its name just like Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, and shuttle spacecraft before it all had their names. It makes it kind of personal, not just for the astronauts, but for all of us. For MyRadar, I'm John Zarrella.
I'm on my way back to Austin from Victoria, Texas, and I picked up a little passenger here.
You didn't find the dog found you, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have a plan? Severe Weather Awareness Week is here. We're profiling the top weather hazards and will let you know how you can stay safe. Watch our 5-part series right here in the app. Severe Weather Awareness Week, only on MyRadar.
Welcome back to it. Bring it back home till 7:27 by. Riders ready. Watch the gate.
I always believed I was going to be a pro athlete. As I was a kid, I just loved being outside, and I loved playing sports, and I loved challenging myself physically and competing with my friends. Why would I want to work a job when I could play with my friends outside?
A big deck out back, and I could sit on the deck, watch the sunset.
His last sunset on that deck was November 7th, 2018. The following morning on November 8th, just after sunrise while he was still sleeping, the campfire started racing toward him. What happened next was unimaginable. In 4 hours, the fire ripped through Paradise and Magalia.
In the meantime, a small army of committed volunteers is doing what it can to help orphaned and injured animals. Doug Thron is a California-based professional drone pilot and environmentalist.
I kept seeing the feed coming up on the news of the burned up koalas, and I was like, well, I'm going to Australia, I'm sure, because, yeah, it literally actually... Yeah, it brought me to tears to see the little koalas all burned up.
Subtitled Cosmos Possible Worlds. It's an exploration not only of exoplanets, of which we have multiple thousands in the catalog now. Oh, that's bigger, that's smaller, that has this conditions, that has those conditions. And you say, where does Earth fit into that? Is Earth going to become one of these? Can we protect it from what these outcomes are? Venus, to our left, has a runaway greenhouse effect in our own solar system. It's 900 degrees Fahrenheit on Venus. It used to be, we think it used to have lush running water and continents and oceans. How about Mars? Mars has evidence of dried riverbeds and lakes. Nothing there. Something bad happened to our left and to our right. Possible worlds is not only the kind of world we might want to create for ourselves, it's the warnings of other worlds that have gone astray.
A cherry red Tesla heading toward Mars with a dummy called Starman behind the wheel is without much debate the most bizarre sight in the history of space travel. But the man behind it is clearly no dummy.
Just want something to capture the imagination, get people excited about space.
Elon Musk, the founder of SpaceX, knows how to get attention. Successfully launching the Falcon Heavy rocket last year, landing 2 boosters back at Cape Canaveral, and flying Starman all on that first test flight got SpaceX plenty of it. For Musk, Falcon Heavy was a stepping stone toward fulfilling his long-held vision of a self-sustaining city on Mars.
I think we should really do our very best to become a multi-planet species and to extend consciousness beyond Earth, and we should do it now.
Musk founded SpaceX in 2002, and reality quickly hit him squarely in the face. Flying in space was not easy, and it was unforgiving. The first demonstration flights of the Falcon 1 rocket from Kwajalein Atoll in the Pacific failed. SpaceX was in trouble, pretty much before it got off the ground.
It was our 4th launch. And if that launch had not succeeded, SpaceX, that would have been the end of SpaceX. That was all. I'd run out of money. There were no more investors, and that would have been it.
But it wasn't. It was just the beginning. The successful flight in 2008 was the first privately developed liquid-fueled rocket to orbit the Earth. That same year, NASA awarded SpaceX a $1.6 billion contract to fly resupply missions to the International Space Station using his next-generation Falcon 9 rocket and the Dragon spacecraft.
So you can see behind me various barrel sections for Falcon 9. That's actually serial number 2. That completed tank is serial number 2 of Falcon 9. Serial number 1's on the test stand in Texas. And then serial number 3 is in barrel sections on the floor.
During the past 6 years, the company's Falcon 9 has lifted satellites into orbit. Dragon has delivered supplies to the space station. And in a revolutionary technological advancement, landing and reusing the first stage boosters.
So obviously, if we can reuse the rocket, say 1,000 times, then that would make the capital cost of the rocket per launch only about $50,000.
And with another contract from NASA in hand, the company was building Crew Dragon to carry astronauts to the space station. Success has not come without some significant setbacks. A Falcon 9 exploded after liftoff, another blew up on the launch pad, and a Crew Dragon was destroyed during a pad test. The company is now nearly 3 years behind schedule getting astronauts to the space station. Space is hard, which seems to push Musk harder. Ever the promoter, Musk, the P.T. Barnum of the 21st century, continues to keep his company squarely in the spotlight.
I'd like to introduce the first paying customer of VFR. Would Yusaku Miyazawa please come forward?
Miyazawa, a Japanese billionaire, will fly with a group of his friends to the moon on a massive rocket called Starship. How much he paid for the flight, which is years away because Starship hasn't flown yet, is not known. SpaceX, in a relatively short amount of time, has become a household name. So much so that one could argue it is the most recognizable private company brand in aerospace. And clearly, Elon Musk intends to keep it that way. For MyRadar, I'm John Zarrella.
From epic hurricanes to record-breaking tropical storms, the last few years have left indelible marks across this country. Hurricane season is upon us, and the time to prepare for what nature could bring is here. I'm Chief Meteorologist Leslie Hudson. Join me along with meteorologists Mike Linden and Stephanie Lauber as we maneuver through this year's storm season. Navigating the Storm, a MyRadar special series launching June 1st with live reporting and commentary from our team of meteorologists. Join us live in the app and online as we power through the potential wind and water impacts that could affect us all.
The SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket sits atop Launch Pad 39A, poised to lift the Crew Dragon spacecraft and its precious cargo, 2 men on their seminal journey to the International Space Station. This is it, counting down to a moment some 9 years in the making.
Liftoff.
It was 2011 when the last U.S. astronauts left the Earth on a U.S.-built spaceship, the Shuttle Atlantis. Now, NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley are about to taste history, flying in a commercially built vehicle no one has flown in before. They landed at the Kennedy Space Center last week for final preparations, including the obligatory landing strip press conference.
Both Doug and I are really excited to be here. This is an awesome time to be an astronaut with a new spacecraft, to get a chance to go and fly.
Think of it this way. In 1981, John Young and Bob Crippen flew the Shuttle Columbia on a test flight. That was 39 years ago. And that was the last time astronauts flew a freshly minted, newly designed spaceship from U.S. soil. Like Young and Crippen, Behnken and Hurley flew space shuttles too, albeit decades after Columbia's maiden voyage. Like Young and Crippen, Behnken and Hurley were military test pilots. And this is a test flight with all the risks that come with spaceflight.
Right now, we are trying to identify any risks that we know of that's out there and continue to look at risks and buy them down. But we also can't fool ourselves. You know, human spaceflight is really, really tough.
This past weekend, to make it as smooth as possible before they fly, the astronauts went through a launch day dry run. Dressed in their spacesuits, Hurley and Behnken exited the Neil Armstrong Operations and Checkout Building, posed for pictures, and got into the specially designed Tesla SUV for the 20-minute ride to the launch pad, walked across the access arm to the Crew Dragon spacecraft. All of this done with social distancing protocols in place, The astronauts say they have been tested a couple times for coronavirus, but added the extra medical attention is not a big deal.
And it seems like every year the scrutiny gets greater. So from that perspective, I think it's been relatively normal, comparatively speaking. And we just, I think, after all these years are just kind of used to the poking and prodding and blood draws and all the other things that come along with flying into space.
One of the other things that goes along with flying in space is the weather. And with Crew Dragon's advanced abort capabilities, the weather has to be acceptable not only at the launch site, but up the East Coast and, believe it or not, across the Atlantic.
We're monitoring weather all the way along the ascent track, which means from here in Florida all the way up the eastern seaboard of North America, United States and Canada, and all the way over basically to Ireland across the northern Atlantic. We're monitoring that weather. And along that way, we're monitoring a lot of the same things. We're looking at winds, we're looking at lightning, we're looking at precipitation. We're actually looking at waves. We're looking at wave velocity and wave height.
Once in orbit and on their way to the station, Hurley and Behnken will put the spacecraft through its paces to test out its capabilities. Then, about 19 hours after liftoff, they will rendezvous with station. And by then, we won't likely be calling it Crew Dragon.
Have you guys named your Crew Dragon?
We have. We have to save some suspense for the mission itself, but we do have a name, and we will break it out appropriately, and we've got something for you to look forward to on launch day.
So, Crew Dragon will get its name just like Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, and shuttle spacecraft before it all had their names. It makes it kind of personal, not just for the astronauts, but for all of us. For MyRadar, I'm John Zarrella.
Hey guys, I'm on my way back to Austin from Victoria, Texas, and I picked up a little passenger here.
You didn't find the dog found you, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have a plan? Severe Weather Awareness Week is here. We're profiling the top weather hazards and will let you know how you can stay safe. Watch our 5-part series right here in the app. Severe Weather Awareness Week, only on MyRadar.
Moving back to it, bring it back home till 7:27 by. Riders ready, watch the gate.
I always believed I was going to be a pro athlete. As I was a kid, I just loved being outside, and I loved playing sports, and I loved challenging myself physically and competing with my friends. Why would I want to work a job when I could play with my friends outside?
And good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our special live coverage of our SpaceX Crew Dragon Demo-2 mission. I'm Chief Meteorologist Leslie Hudson for MyRadar, here taking a second attempt. You may know the first attempt of the rocket launch was scrubbed on Wednesday, just about 20 minutes before liftoff due to thunderstorms in the area. There's still thunderstorms in the area as well. We're going to get to that in just a second. But if you're new to us, welcome. We want to make sure you get social with us. You can see our social handles right here below me. Make sure you join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're also on YouTube, you guys. We'd love for you to subscribe to our channel. We're live right now there. And make sure you click the notification bell to make sure you know when we are dropping new content. Now, before we get started in the launch coverage, we want to make sure we check out those weather conditions, as I mentioned. So there have been thunderstorms in the area yet again. This is the rainy season for the Central Florida area. They're used to seeing storms every day about this time, and the West Coast sea breeze has already progressed over to the Cape. And if we look at the live radar, you can see from the MyRadar app that there is definitely some storms in the area. Now, they're just to the west of the Cape. They might be within the threshold of not being a launch. We can't have any thunderstorms within about 10 nautical miles of launch pad 39A, and there can be no lightning within about 30 miles of the launch pad, and there has been lightning in the area as well. NASA continues to update us. I also checked the METAR data within this last hour. Winds have been out of the southeast at around 10 to 15 miles an hour, and some of the cloud decks have been right on the threshold there of not meeting that criteria. They have to be higher than 4,500 feet. We have some as low as 2,800 and is 20,000 feet. So that just shows us that we've got thunderstorms in the area. So we're going to continue to watch that as we head through these next 30 minutes or so. There's also all kinds of criteria besides the cloud deck, as I mentioned. There's also can be not thunderstorm anvil clouds near the launch pad, because those often can contain lightning or can spark lightning very quickly. And there's also rocket-induced lightning that can also be a factor if these anvil clouds are close by. So some of the criteria, again, there's a lot of it that NASA follows, and it is a tough match to try and get out that rocket before Mother Nature fires off those storms. Now, let's talk about our coverage. We are going to be joining our special correspondent, John Zarrella, who's going to take us through these next 30 minutes. John, you and I were here Wednesday trying to get this historic day up, and of course, Mother Nature had other plans. Things are looking a little better today, but still not 100%. A lot of folks there have had butterflies in their stomachs over these last couple of days, but also a lot of dreams as we make this attempt at this historic launch. John?
You know, Leslie, you're absolutely right. It was really a hot mess on Wednesday, wasn't it? And you know, just a little while ago here, we had thunderstorms here, and we're in Merritt Island, literally broadcasting from my back porch, and thunderstorms and heavy rain about an hour ago. That's moved on. We haven't heard any thunder now. And you know, when you look at the shots of the launch pad, it does look pretty good. Certainly, as you pointed out, better than it was just a couple of days ago. But, you know, that there's always that issue. And you're right, Leslie. There are so many variables. And we didn't even mention and talk about yet, which we will, the conditions downrange all the way up the east coast of the United States and over to Ireland that have to be good for launch in case, God forbid, they would have to abort and the astronauts would have one of several landing spots across the Atlantic. But right now I want to welcome everyone, Leslie, that's joining us from around the United States and around the world. I know people that are watching us, you know, down in South Florida, and I've got a friend who's been texting me from over in France saying that she's been watching us and watched us the other day and will be watching again today. So we got people all over the world that are tuned into us and watching our coverage of this launch. And I want to take you right out to the launch pad now. That's launch pad 39A at the Kennedy Space Center, just so that we can check in and listen in to the conversation between ground and the conversation with the astronauts. Right now it's pretty quiet, pretty intermittent, so we'll get back to that at some point real soon. But again, this is the launch of the Crew Dragon spacecraft with astronauts Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken on board. And, you know, Launch Pad 39A is itself steeped in incredible history. All of the Apollo moon missions lifted off from Launch Pad 39A, and many of the space shuttle missions, particularly the early missions, lifted off from Launch Pad 39A as well. There's also a 39B that was added for shuttle flights as well, but quite a few launches from 39A, you know, and very historic launches, again, going back to Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin in Apollo 11, lifting off from there and heading to the moon. The astronauts are the first to fly the Crew Dragon and the first to fly from U.S. soil since the program ended in 2011 when Atlantis lifted off in July of 2011 on STS-135. That was the final flight in the Space Shuttle program. If they get off the ground today, and it's looking pretty good, they will rendezvous and dock with the International Space Station tomorrow about 10:30 in the morning, and then the hatch will open. There will be a welcoming ceremony with the astronaut Chris Cassidy, who is there, and I would assume the 2 Russian cosmonauts that are up there as well will be part of that welcoming ceremony. This is the first, and this is something that kind of surprised me, and I said, wow, I didn't remember that. This is the first 2-person orbital spaceflight since STS-4 in 1982, and the commander of that was Ken Mattingly. Hank Hartsfield was the pilot of that. So now, you know, let's go back now and take a look at what happened a little while ago. About 3 hours ago was suit up of the astronauts, Hurley and Behnken, in the Neil Armstrong operations and checkout building. You know, quite clearly they'd done it before just a couple of days ago, but they were there. They got their suits on, had the checks of the suits to make sure they were fitting properly. Everything was good with that. Once they were finished with that, it was just a little bit after 12 o'clock noon here on the U.S. East Coast when the 2 astronauts walked out of the operations and checkout building. They waved to the crowd that was there waiting for them. Now remember, this is with social distancing. In the past, when astronauts would walk out from the operations and checkout building, there would be hundreds of people there, you know, photographers, but because of social distancing, the crowd was kept a little bit sparse in this era of COVID-19. But their families were there, social distancing. The astronauts were on one side of a line, and their wives and children were on another side of a line. Bob Behnken, we could see in the video, he had given his son a virtual hug. And you know, at one point you could hear Behnken say to his son, "Are you going to listen to mommy and make her life easy?" Of course, right? Because, you know, the thing is, we don't know how long Behnken and Hurley are going to be up on the space station. That's an open-ended question right now once they get there. Now, once they finished that, they got into the specially made Tesla Model X SUV, outfitted especially for them. You can't go buy that thing out there at a Tesla store. It doesn't exist. And they headed out to the launch pad. It's about a 20-minute ride from the operations and checkout building out to the launch pad. At one point, you could see Bob Behnken with his window open, waving out of the window of the vehicle. So it was, you know, another great ride out to the launch pad, and everything proceeding, you know, as expected. No glitches at any point along the way. As you probably know, Elon Musk is the founder of SpaceX. He is also the founder of Tesla. And you may recall during the first test flight of the Falcon Heavy rocket, they actually launched a red Tesla Roadster with I don't know if it was a blow-up doll called Starman that was in the driver's seat. And they launched that out towards Mars. and an orbit around Mars. I believe it's still in orbit around Mars and probably will be for quite some time. So that was maybe one of the most iconic pictures, you know, that we have ever seen in the 60-year history of the space program. You know, of course, Elon Musk is here, along with NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine, but also the President of the United States, Donald Trump, who was here on Wednesday, has come back to witness this launch. Now, Vice President Mike Pence was here also on Wednesday, but we haven't seen whether Pence is here for this particular attempt or not. Haven't seen him at any point in time so far. Now, I want to also tell you that, you know, this is not like flying an airplane. The vehicle is almost totally autonomous, but the astronauts do have the ability to override the system in case of an emergency, in case they need to go through and do any kind of changes to perhaps their orbit. They can do things and again, command the vehicle on their own. In fact, once they get into orbit on their way to the space station, they are going to take control of the vehicle, and they are going to put the spacecraft through its paces so that they know that certain systems work, that certain systems react. And I want to bring in David Waters, who is my producer here. And David had spent a lot of time as a reporter here on the Space Coast, covering the space program, as well as spending a year with United Space Alliance. So he is, you know, intimately tied to the space program, to the shuttle program. And David, I was saying that these guys are military test pilots. So flying a vehicle that's totally autonomous with touch screens and all is something that they had to get used to, I'm sure.
Well, both Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley said it's a very different experience to go from being those stick and rudder pilots used to manually controlling things to having a touchscreen system, because not even the space shuttle was touchscreen. It had to be adapted over the years, and they got a glass cockpit in the space shuttles, which these both crew members have flown in. But this is a very different type of vehicle. But one thing that is the same is right after liftoff, the rocket has to go to the same place the space shuttle used to go to, the International Space Station. So if you remember back in the shuttle days, they would say roll program. It would pitch and roll, and you'd see a maneuver where the shuttle would change orientation to head to the space station. This rocket will do the same thing. About 10 seconds after launch today, we will see it pitch and roll to start heading towards the International Space Station. That's so they can have that docking around 10:29 tomorrow in the morning.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, David, there's the time for liftoff is instantaneous. So they go instantaneous or they don't go today at all. And the same would be on any launch attempt. But quite clearly, you know, they have to chase down the space station. And depending on what time of the day they lift off, what day of the week they lift off, you know, they can get there in a matter of hours, or they can get there in a matter of a day and a half to 2 days. It really just depends.
Yeah, and think of it like a football being intercepted. If you throw a football, the other person is running to try to intercept it at a certain point. That's the same thing as trying to intercept the International Space Station on a just different scale. So the reason for the instantaneous launch window is so they don't have to use more fuel than necessary to get there. And by doing that, they can launch more payload. They've got more fuel to maneuver if they need to. So that's why there's this 1 second instantaneous launch window, so they can meet up precisely with the space station without any waste.
I know some of the, in one of the press conferences, you know, as we're looking at the wide shot of the launch pad there with the vehicle, and you can see some of the clouds in the distance, but, you know, at least at this point, that doesn't seem to be an issue. What I was going to say is that in one of the press briefings, the NASA and officials and the SpaceX official were talking about the fact that that one of the reasons why they've chosen these particular days and this particular launch window was because they wanted enough time between the time they lift off and the time they get to the space station to put the vehicle through its paces, because this is, after all, a test flight. Right, David? It's a test flight.
I mean, this is just like when Space Shuttle Columbia launched in 1981 in April. It was the first time a vehicle had been flown with astronauts right into orbit, and this will be the same kind of thing, the first test flight with humans on board this rocket today. So the Falcon 9, a very different launch vehicle than we've seen for the past 30 years.
Yeah, absolutely. This is this is going back to a capsule. So, and we keep talking about the astronauts, Hurley and Behnken. So, who are these guys? Well, Doug Hurley, he's 53 years old. He is a colonel in the U.S. Marine Corps. His hometown is Appalachian, New York. He's been in the astronaut corps for 20 years. So he came into the astronaut office with the class of 2000. He's a veteran of 2 space shuttle flights. He was the pilot of Endeavour in 2009, and he was the pilot of Atlantis STS-135 in July of 2011, which was, of course, the final flight in the space shuttle program. Bob Behnken is 49 years old. He is also a colonel, but he's in the U.S. Air Force. He has a Ph.D. His hometown is St. Anne, Missouri. He also, 20 years of astronaut experience. He came in 2000, the class of 2000, so in the same year that Hurley came in. They're both in the same astronaut class. He is also a veteran of 2 space shuttle flights, STS-123 Endeavour in 2008. He was a mission specialist on that flight, and STS-130 Endeavour in 2010. He was a mission specialist on that flight as well. He has a total of more than 700 hours in space, and he did 6 spacewalks and has a total of 37 hours walking in space. And, by the way, both of these astronauts are themselves married to astronauts who, like them, flew on space shuttle missions. Hurley is married to Karen Nyberg, and Behnken is married to Megan MacArthur. Nyberg flew as a mission specialist, STS-124, and MacArthur flew on STS-125. And interestingly enough, she was a Hubble mission specialist. She was the last one with her hands on Hubble. Now, we're less than 20 minutes now from launch, and everything is going well. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, David, they have gone ahead now, and propellant loading is underway, right?
That's right, and they began that second stage loading a short time ago. As you're looking out there at the launch pad, you can see some venting off the side of the rocket. That's perfectly normal. They are loading that second stage right now as, I'm sorry, that's supposed to start shortly, but the first stage loading of liquid oxygen began some time ago, about 35 minutes before launch. And this was the controversial load and go, which both SpaceX and NASA now sign off and say is safe. But there was at one time when this was being proposed that some astronauts from the space program were against it originally.
Right, but Tom Stafford, who is a well-decorated astronaut, originally said, wait a minute, we've never done this before. We always fuel the vehicles before we put the astronauts on board, and now you want to do what? Fuel the vehicle, after the astronauts are on board. But ultimately, everybody got on the same page and got comfortable with load and go. So, we had already said that we're coming to you from my back porch. We're here in my back porch. And we are, as I think we mentioned, 15.7 miles from the launch pad, roughly as the crow flies, from here to launch pad 39A. But with this vehicle, it's still, when you go, I've watched a lot of Falcon 9s from here lift off, and you run outside, you go around the corner of my backyard, you get over there, and you can see them as they take off. But it still looks pretty small from 15.6 miles away. And we're here for a couple of reasons. Social distancing is one of them. We are doing our part. NASA had asked people to stay away, do not come here for the launch, watch it on TV, because of COVID-19. But as we saw with the launch on Wednesday, the scrubbed attempt, people packed the Space Coast, and they are doing it again all along the highway that leads out here, 528, Interstate 528 by Port Canaveral, absolutely packed with cars. Up in Titusville, all along US 1 and along the river there. You can look across the river and see the vehicle assembly building and see the launch pad. All across up that area, there's a bridge called the Max Brewer Bridge. Wednesday, it was packed. People were on top of each other. So, unfortunately, everybody wants to come and see a launch. This is history in the making. We get it. But, you're not practicing social distancing. And, that could very easily, be an issue. And we'd also hope to bring this to you live from the press site, the NASA press site. But we weren't able to do that either because of COVID-19 restrictions. NASA limited the number of credentials. They had over 500 requests for credentials, and they limited it to just over 100. So we were not able to get out there to bring it to you from the press site. But we're here. It's a great view. We're sheltered from the weather. And, speaking of COVID-19, NASA has always taken really, really good care with its astronauts' crews. They're always quarantined in advance, so this is nothing new for them. But with the pandemic, the precautions leading up to this flight were ramped up.
The challenge that we're up against right now is we want to keep everybody safe. That's the number one highest priority of NASA, keeping people safe. And so we're asking people not to travel to the Kennedy Space Center. And I will tell you that makes me sad to even say it. Boy, I wish we could make this into something really spectacular. But where we are right now, we need to get commercial crew launched. We need Demo-2 to be successful. And the best way we can do that is to do it while keeping everybody safe. And having large crowds of hundreds of thousands of people at the Kennedy Space Center, now is not the time for that.
We had Bob and Doug here for training. In fact, we actually have some the Crew 1 astronauts here for training as well. We are ensuring that the only essential personnel are near them. They're wearing masks and gloves. We're cleaning the training facility twice daily. I think we're really doing a great job to ensure that we are not impacting the safety or the health of the astronauts' lives. And we're largely doing the same thing for our employees.
In this new environment, we had to take even more precautions because it's really about not only Bob and Doug's safety, but it's also about the safety of the crew on board the International Space Station. But this is honestly a concern even without COVID-19. We already have health stabilization plans. We have ways to make sure that the crews taken care of and then goes into quarantine prior to the missions to make sure that they don't infect the International Space Station.
I think it's important that we keep reminding ourselves, all of us, that this is it's called Demo-2. It's a demonstration mission. That's why you've only got the 2 astronauts on board the vehicle, and it is a test flight to test out the systems, as we talked about, to make sure everything works well. And if this goes as planned, they rendezvous with the International Space Station. They spend time at the International Space Station. They come back. They land in the Atlantic Ocean just off of the U.S. East Coast. And once that's done, whenever they get back, it will pave the way, open the door for 16 operational flights. NASA has contracted with SpaceX for 16 operational flights to take astronaut crews up and back to the International Space Station. Now remember, Boeing Company is also working on a vehicle called the Starliner, but in their first test flight attempt to the International Space Station, uncrewed, with no people on board, they failed to reach the proper orbit. So NASA and Boeing have decided that they will go ahead and try that again before they move to a test flight with humans on board. Now, we heard in a press conference just yesterday that it would probably be about the end of the year, before the end of the year, but they would have it before the end of the year, that test flight back up to the International Space Station. So at some point next year, it's very likely that NASA will have 2 contract partners, both SpaceX and Boeing, flying vehicles with crews to the International Space Station. You know, NASA released some animation just a little while, about a week or so ago, that takes us through the launch, the rendezvous, the docking with the ISS, and then return to Earth. So it's actually pretty cool video that they released, and has its own animation, and it has its own narration on it. Let's listen into a little bit of that.
Separation visually confirmed.
Mains have been deployed.
All right, back out at Launch Pad 39A, the Dragon spacecraft, and on top of the Falcon 9 rocket. Everything is looking good. You know, we're not hearing a whole lot of crosstalk between the astronauts on board and the folks in launch control. So that's a good thing. You know, they're running through some of their final paces, doing the checkouts and making sure that everything is configured right for liftoff. We're, you know, about 10 minutes from liftoff, so we're moving right along. We're ticking right along here. And, you know, once in orbit, while they're on the way to the rendezvous with the International Space Station, the astronauts are going to perform some orbital maneuvers. And as I mentioned earlier, put Dragon through some of its paces because they want to prepare it for the next crews that fly. They want to see that there are no bugs or glitches that need to be worked out down the road before the next crew flies. And so when you stop to think about it, what SpaceX and what NASA have been able to accomplish in really a relatively short amount of time. Let's listen in now. I think we've got some crosstalk coming up here.
Dragon, SpaceX confirmed displays are configured for launch.
SpaceX Dragon displays are configured for launch.
Copy. Bob, Doug, on behalf of the entire SpaceX team, it's been a huge honor to help you get ready for today's historic mission. Know that we're with you, have an amazing flight, and enjoy those views of our beautiful planet.
Thanks, Jay. It is absolutely our honor to be part of this huge effort to get the United States back in the launch business. We'll talk to you from orbit. Thank you.
Copy all. Thanks for those words.
Well, there you go, folks. You all heard it. We all heard it. They're giving them the go for launch here, and Hurley and Behnken saying, you know, we'll talk to you from orbit, and the ground saying, you know, enjoy those spectacular views. Again, the crew is ready to go. The vehicle is ready to go. They are not working any issues. They have not been working any issues. And as I said, you know, it is nothing short of remarkable what both SpaceX and NASA have been able to accomplish as a team. And you know, remember one thing. One of the most critical things, if not the singular critical thing that had to be accomplished, was that the SpaceX vehicle, this Crew Dragon, had to be safer, markedly safer than the space shuttle ever was. That was a criteria NASA absolutely insisted on. And that, of course, is one of the reasons why, you know, we have that Hurley and Behnken basically have escape capability from this vehicle, from the launch pad, basically all the way to orbit. So it is, nobody wants to see it happen. Nobody wants to see them ever use that, but clearly they do have that capability. You know, as we've noted, the Crew Dragon is sitting on top of the Falcon 9 rocket. It's powered in its first stage by 9 Merlin engines. Together they produce about 1.7 million pounds of thrust. The engines burn liquid oxygen and rocket-grade kerosene. SpaceX says they can lose up to 4 engines and still complete the mission. Crew Dragon is on its maneuvering rockets that it has. When you see Crew Dragon, you see that it's got these sort of indentations there, and those are you can see it there on the pad with those indentations on the Crew Dragon, and those are the Super Draco engines that would be used to pull Dragon away in the event of any kind of an emergency. Pull it away from that first stage, and then bring it back to Earth. And it has Mach 3 parachute system that underwent 27 different tests. And the Super Draco engines, they underwent some 700 tests. We already mentioned it, David, briefly. We're coming up on, less than 6 minutes to go, David. But we talked about load and go and how controversial it was. But, again, they got through it. They've done it, and everything is going really smoothly here.
It is. Hang on one second.
It's really smooth.
Yeah, you're right. And let me talk about one other thing other than load and go, because now that we're getting so close, I want to switch modes and talk about what people can expect for the launch, because that's what they're going to want to know. When we lift off, about 10 seconds after, you'll see the vehicle pitching and rolling.
And
they'll say
fuel
vehicle is pitching downrange. About 1 minute into flight is the area when we'll hear the call called max Q. And as you know, that's when the vehicle is passing through the maximum stress on the rocket. We always heard that on shuttle. This is a very high physical stress moment on the vehicle. So that's when it will be going through that. One other thing to point out, unlike the space shuttle for 30 years, this has an ability to abort at any point during the entire launch countdown. They can jettison off the end of the Falcon 9 and splash down somewhere in the ocean, depending on at what point they come off. So it's a much safer system.
And I think Dragon has now switched over correct to internal power, I believe. It should be on internal power. That would have come about 5 minutes before the liftoff, so it should be on internal power. We're just a couple.
Falcon 9 heaters closing out.
Right, so they're on internal power. We're about 4 minutes away from flight. Liftoff from launch pad 39A. A new spacecraft flying off U.S. soil with astronauts on board for the first time since astronauts John Young and Bob Crippen flew Columbia on the very first space shuttle flight in 1981. So let's start to listen in to this countdown to the first test flight of the Crew Dragon with astronauts on board.
Stage 2, RP1 bleed. Stage 1, RP1 bleed. AFTS final setup started. MVAC igniter purges. Pogo bleed.
Dragon has transitioned to terminal count and is on internal power.
Stage 1, LOX load close out. Vehicle is transitioning to internal power. Stage 2, LOX load is closed out. Propellant fills are complete.
Dragon is in auto idle.
Ground gas closeouts is starting.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
Dragon is in countdown.
FTS is armed for launch.
Dragon, SpaceX, go for launch.
SpaceX Dragon, we're go for launch. Let's light this candle.
T-minus 30 seconds.
Stage 1 tanks pressing for flight.
T-minus 15 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 and Crew Dragon. Go NASA. Go SpaceX. Godspeed, Bob and Doug.
Vehicle pitching downrange.
1 Alpha.
Copy, 1 Alpha.
Stage 1 propulsion is nominal.
Falcon power and telemetry nominal.
M1D throttle down.
Vehicle is supersonic.
M1D throttle up.
Max Q.
1 Bravo.
Copy, 1 Bravo.
Start of MVAC engine chill. M1D throttle down. Eco.
2 Alpha.
Falcon stage separation confirmed.
Copy, 2 Alpha.
MVAC ignition.
Acquisition of signal lofts.
Stage 2 propulsion is nominal.
About 8 minutes and 44 seconds into today's flight, so a little over 5 minutes to go still on this second stage. You heard the call out 2 Alpha, so they're now in the longest abort zone that carries them all the way from about North Carolina up the eastern seaboard almost to Canada. Things looking good though, getting good call outs, nominal propulsion on that second stage. Bob and Doug continuing to make their way into orbit.
Dragon SpaceX nominal trajectory.
Acquisition of signal in Bermuda.
SpaceX Dragon nominal trajectory.
All right, here in nominal trajectory, so Dragon pointed in the right direction, continuing to make their flight uphill. Heard acquisition of signal Bermuda. That's one of the other ground stations that they're using to get telemetry and data back from this spacecraft.
Stage 2 propulsion is still nominal.
So you can see, folks, so far everything has been spectacular, flawless liftoff. The trajectory is on target. They've already had the main engine cut off. And we are right now probably, I'm looking at the sheet
a little
here,
over 4 minutes, 40 seconds into the flight.
Bermuda,
Bob and Doug flying at more than 5,600 miles.
So they're making their way up the east coast of the United States.
Already
ultimately, they will get up to Nova Scotia, and then they will begin a turn where they would ultimately be picked up over Ireland would be the last possible spot where they could go through and abort if they had to. But right now, no indication of anything like that. Everything is perfect. And we know that they are on the second stage. The first stage booster is gone. It's on its way back to Earth, landing hopefully on the barge out there in the Atlantic called I Still Love You. Yeah, that's the name of the barge. So, you know, we can see there, we're looking at the engine burn. It's still burning as a second stage rocket. You can see still burning. And we won't have cutoff. First stage entry will be about 7 minutes back, you know, on Earth, and second stage will continue to burn here, and it's going to be a couple more minutes before we actually have engine cutoff, because we're about, what now, 6.5 minutes into the flight. You're hearing no commentary between ground and the spacecraft. Everything is going well, and it'll be about 9 minutes or so in before we actually end up with the crew jettisoning the second stage, and then the Dragon spacecraft going into orbit. But we are right now in just a wait and see for another couple of minutes or so as to Dragon entering orbit. Wait a minute, I'm picking up everything's still good, trajectory still good, I believe is what the words were.
We'll hear the call out SECO. It'll then be a little
Stage 2 propulsion is still good.
A little over 3 minutes until Dragon physically separates.
So there
from the
you're
second
heard it again,
Falcon
folks.
9
Nominal trajectory means everything is going perfectly. They're on a perfect trajectory to get themselves in the proper orbit, aligned in the proper orbit in order to get to the International Space Station. We're still seeing, what's that? That's the first stage entry burn on the right. So what we are looking at on the screen is that first stage rocket coming back back to Earth, getting ready to land on that barge, the I Still Love You. And on the left-hand side of the screen, you have the astronauts there. Less than a minute to orbit now. That's a big deal. They get into orbit, less than a minute, and that is a huge milestone. The next milestone, of course, will come tomorrow when they rendezvous with the International Space Station and dock with the International Space Station at about 10:30 in the morning. So about 8 minutes and 47 seconds after about 8:47, 8:50, we should be seeing them in orbit here coming up pretty quickly. And we're still watching. We can see on the right-hand side of the screen that they cut the picture there of the Falcon 9 heading back down to the barge. There it is. And there we are.
Now you can see the displays that they are seeing right now themselves.
Terminal guidance.
MVAC throttle step.
We are coming up 25 seconds or so away from SECO, or second engine cutoff.
This is also the point where Bob and Doug are experiencing their highest G-force. We're seeing the counter tick up to right about 4.8.
Copy, Shannon.
You heard Shannon, so that just means they're in their final abort zones. If they were to abort at this point, it would either be an abort to orbit or to land off the coast of Ireland. Standing by for second cutoff confirmation.
MVAC throttle step. MVAC shutdown.
Stage 1 landing clear.
Confirmation of SECO's second engine cutoff.
Now we are waiting for our first stage to make its way to our drone ship. Of course, I Still Love You.
Dragon SpaceX nominal orbital insertion.
Did get confirmation nominal orbital insertion.
Nominal orbital insertion.
And what you're seeing on your screen
So we have
is
it
a
now,
live view of our
the
drone
Dragon
ship,
spacecraft, the Crew
where
Dragon
our first stage
spacecraft
will be coming
with
down.
astronauts Bob Behnken, Doug Hurley, the first
like
to
we
fly
lost that
from
live
U.S.
view,
soil in
we'll wait for
9
confirmation of that
years,
landing shortly
and the
here.
first to fly on a brand new, newly minted vehicle since Crippen and Young flew Columbia in 1981, that first shuttle. They are in orbit. They are now on their way to chase down the International Space Station. We also saw that the first stage booster successfully landed on the I Still Love You ship, the barge that's out there in the Atlantic Ocean. So right now, we can see the astronauts in there. They are in orbit. They are on their way. It has been an incredible day for both the U.S. space program, NASA, and for SpaceX, the commercial company. The first time in history a commercial company, not a nation, and there have only been a handful of nations around the world who have ever been able to accomplish putting humans in space, and now a commercial company has done it for the very first time. We keep pointing out that at least in low Earth orbit, NASA will no longer be the owner of the vehicle, the company that flies the vehicle. They will be the customer. NASA will be a customer in low Earth orbit. This will allow them to free up a lot of their financial resources, NASA, to spend their time working on the Artemis program and building the SLS and the Orion spacecraft that will ultimately take humans back to the moon and then eventually onto Mars, with NASA saying that 2024 is still a target date to put a man and a woman on Mars. We'll see if they can accomplish that. But right now, the most important thing is in low Earth orbit. What's that now? We're 12. Oh, the second stage. We're waiting for the second stage. Yeah, the capsule itself, Crew Dragon, will separate still from the second stage. That's the one thing we're still waiting for to happen. But for all intent and purposes, they are in space, and they are heading on their way to the International Space Station. And again, this is a milestone. This is something that has never been done before. And there we go. We can see that they are now separated. The Dragon spacecraft is on its own. It is alone. It is on its way to the International Space Station with astronauts Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken on board in what is clearly Separation confirmed. Yeah, we could all see it. So yeah, separation confirmed. This is clearly a huge day in the history of the U.S. space program. It is a huge day for the nation. It is a huge day for the world. It is a huge day for commercial space flight. Again, the Dragon spacecraft with Hurley and Behnken.
Dragon is now officially making its way to the International Space Station today.
Dragon SpaceX with that separation call. We have a few words for you from our Falcon 19.
Standing by.
Dragon, Chief Engineer on Dragon to ground. Bob Doug, on behalf of the entire launch team, thanks for flying with Falcon 9 today. We hope you enjoyed the ride and wish you a great mission.
Thanks, Bala. Congratulations to you and the F9 team for the first human ride for Falcon 9, and it was incredible. Appreciate all the hard work, and thanks for the great ride to space.
Copy all.
Oh, and proud of you guys
So,
and the
you know,
rest of the team.
one of the things we were
thank you
waiting
so much
for,
what
Leslie,
you have
that,
done for us
you know, we
today,
have
putting
not
America
heard
back
yet,
into
as they were
low
supposed to
orbit
name the
from the
spacecraft.
Florida
You
coast.
know, all spacecraft, U.S. spacecraft,
Copy all. Good luck. Godspeed.
going back to the Mercury days, you know, they all had their names, you know, whether it was Friendship 7 or Liberty Bell, or the names of the space all the names of the space shuttle vehicles, and the astronauts said they'd have a surprise with what name that they chose for their Dragon, Crew Dragon spacecraft. I kind of figured maybe they'd let the cat out of the bag once they got into orbit, but I didn't hear it. We didn't hear it yet, but it was a spectacular day, Leslie. And thank you for giving us good weather on the Space Coast to get it off the ground. Leslie?
The actual docking ring and the hatch that they're going to be going through once they attach to the International Space Station. And also 4 of those.
Okay, you guys, I'm having trouble hearing John, and so I apologize if I was standing here for a while. But what an incredible day, you guys. It took a second attempt to get this rocket off the ground. We finally saw an incredible picture-perfect launch from Kennedy Space Center, just about as perfect as it can get. You can never get tired of watching those things, you guys. John's seen over 75 launches, and it's been incredible to see. The weather has been a huge factor over the last couple of days. We've been concerned about the West Coast sea breeze halting these storms, preventing the rocket from being lifted off. But as we saw, there were clouds in the area. However, they met the criteria. I wanted to ask John, I'm not sure if he can hear me. I hope he can. If he can, I wanted John to put into perspective just how historic this day is. So, you know, a lot of us have been around since the shuttles were going up, since we were little kids. But now that we have this rocket launch that went up on American soil, created by an American corporation, what does that mean going forward, John, if you can put that into words for generations to come?
And we're going to be with them, and we're going to be with.
You know, it really is a seminal moment in the history of spaceflight because, as I'd mentioned, you know, up until now, it's only been a handful of nations around the world that have ever been able to launch humans. So now you have a commercial company that has taken over the role for low Earth orbit of putting you know, humans into space. And it does free up NASA to do what NASA should be doing, which is pressing the envelope, which is going back to the moon, which is going on to Mars, and leave low Earth orbit, whether it's space tourism, whether it's trips to the International Space Station, whether it's a space hotel sometime in the future. All of those things in low Earth orbit will be left to commercial companies like SpaceX to do. There's no question about the fact that this changes the dynamic of the future of space flight. And, you know, SpaceX will be one of probably a number of commercial companies that down the road will be taking over, putting crews into low Earth orbit, and eventually putting folks like you and I into low Earth orbit. Leslie?
The mission still continues, and we're going to send it over to KSC to continue
Okay, you guys, thank you, John, for that incredible perspective. You know, John Zarrella, we're so fortunate to have your hands-on experience with all of your illustrious career at the networks and really driving it home for us, the importance of today. I hope everyone has enjoyed this coverage like we have. It has been an incredible day. We're so glad that the rocket has lifted off safely and is now up in orbit, waiting to catch up to the ISS sometime tomorrow. We want to encourage you guys and thank you again for joining us, but make sure that you join us on social media. We are live right now across all our platforms, including Facebook, Instagram, and on YouTube and Twitter as well, you guys. And we would love to catch you there. Make sure you follow us if you're not already doing so on those channels. Before we leave, though, I want to let you know that we want to thank our crew has been working incredibly long hours, including meteorologist Mike Lennon, who's producing this show, as well as our CEO, Andy Green, as well as our production team, Damian McFarland and Matt Hyland at the helm, punching all the buttons so you guys can see the magic that we just saw here today. Now, coming up on Monday, you guys, it is June 1st, day one of hurricane season. We want to make sure that you join us live right here again with our team of meteorologists. We're going to be live every day, June 1 through June 5, talking about hurricane season, trying to get you ready. There's a lot to get ready for, and I want to thank you again for joining us. Here is a look at what you can expect in the up and coming week. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
From epic hurricanes to record-breaking tropical storms, the last few years have left indelible marks across this country. Hurricane season is upon us, and the time to prepare for what nature could bring is here. I'm Chief Meteorologist Leslie Hudson. Join me along with meteorologists Mike Linden and Stephanie Lauber as we maneuver through this year's storm season. Navigating the Storm, a MyRadar special series launching June 1st with live reporting and commentary from our team of meteorologists. Join us live in the app and online as we power through the potential wind and water impacts that could affect us all.